Texas and Florida are ordering buses of migrants to sanctuary states like Colorado, Illinois, and New York, inflaming debates in these communities that have always welcomed the undocumented. Now, the North Star Act would make Minnesota the 12th sanctuary state in the U.S.
Now, this is Talking Points on CBS News Minnesota.
Good evening and welcome to Talking Points. Should Minnesota become a sanctuary state? The North Star Act, a bill before the legislature this year, says yes. Sanctuary state status does not protect the undocumented who are charged with serious and violent crimes. What it does do is protect the undocumented in the case of a minor legal issue, like a traffic ticket. Tonight in Talking Points, we will look at what that would mean for the state's estimated 95,000 undocumented residents. Sanctuary status is already here in part in Minnesota in two largest counties, Hennepin and Ramsey counties, and the cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul. That means law enforcement in these communities are barred from asking about someone's immigration status during a minor offense like a traffic stop. And law enforcement, when they do encounter someone who is undocumented, is not reporting them to the federal government and ICE, that's the Immigration and Customs Enforcement. But the rest of Minnesota is doing just the opposite, reporting and turning over the undocumented to federal agents. Tonight, we'll examine all sides of this issue. Let's start with veteran immigration attorney Esteban Rivera. Well, joining us right now is Esteban Rivera. He is an immigration attorney. Thank you so much, Esteban, for coming on.
Thank you, Esme. I'm happy to be here.
What would it mean to make Minnesota a sanctuary state?
So what will happen is that if the law passes, it will forbid the state and local enforcement entities to share data or accepting federal funding to enforce civil immigration.
So in other words, law enforcement across the state would not be able to essentially enforce federal law if they come across somebody who is undocumented.
Yes, when it's a civil immigration enforcement. So meaning when they do not have criminal record that will trigger federal enforcement.
Okay. All right. Obviously, that would be different if it were, let's say, a serious crime, a murder, an assault, that kind of a thing.
Yes,
that's a different category.
Yes, if it is terrorism, if it is drug-related offenses, if it is something that will trigger federal enforcement, criminal federal enforcement, they will be sharing data. Yes.
Now, we already have the sanctuary status in two of Minnesota's largest counties, in Hennepin County and in Ramsey County. I know that you deal with so many clients. I mean, does this spare some of the clients you represent from getting into serious trouble or even being deported, having that sanctuary status in Hennepin and Ramsey County?
Yes, the biggest difference is if a client is arrested for a simple driving offense, driving without a license, running a red light, or anything that is very simple. If this happens in Ramsey or Hennepin, they are just giving a ticket and they are, released. Or if they are brought up to a police station, that information is not shared with ICE. But when the same offense happens in another county, especially greater Minnesota, I have clients who have been arrested because they had tinted windows, for example, in the car, or no driver's license, and they have been turned to ICE, and then they have been eventually deported.
So literally a significant, like a ticket, a traffic ticket, a traffic stop, could end up changing their lives, changing their families' lives. They are deported from Minnesota.
Correctly. So a petty crime can lead to deportation in these cases. And the biggest problem that I see with that is that's erode public safety trust. So immigrants do not trust the police and they do not report real crime, and that's the problem. So that's why I think sanctuary states do better at creating trust with immigrant communities. It's important to know that Minnesota has over 500,000 immigrant-born people. And if these people are not trusting law enforcement, that erodes the trust overall of the community. And it will be safer for Minnesota if we pass this law.
And you say 500,000 undocumented here in Minnesota. A lot of people say, well, they're breaking the law. What are these people actually doing, these 500,000? Most of them, obviously, there's some bad actors, but what are these people doing for the most part?
So 500,000, including legal and illegal immigrants. And when I say illegal, it's undocumented immigrants, immigrants who do not have papers. And I think there's all kinds of immigrants in Minnesota. We have doctors at the Mayo Clinic. We have people working in construction. We have people who are serving our tables, waiting tables, working as dishwashers. I have all kinds of clients. I have clients who are dishwashers. I have clients who are doctors at the Mayo Clinic. So it's important to know that immigrants in our community play a big role in terms of the economy. They are paying taxes. They are helping the community. Yes, there are some bad actors, but there are reports, there are studies that show that immigrants are less likely to commit a crime than US born people, and also are more likely to create a new business. So they are more entrepreneurial. So the economy is better also when we have immigrants in our communities.
And this is actually the issue of a worker shortage in Minnesota is very real. That immigrant community, many of whom are undocumented, are actually supplying those jobs. I mean, do you think that would help the economy? That's what you're saying, right?
Yes, I think so. I have talked to several construction owners, construction especially in like roofing, who tell me, a Minnesota-born, a white guy is not going to be on roofs. If you see in our industry, every roof is an immigrant who is working on the roof. So we need all of these necessities to be supported.
Okay. Well, Esteban Rivera, thank you so much. We really appreciate your insights.
Thank you very much.
Up next, the argument against a sanctuary state from Minnesota Senate Minority Leader Mark Johnson. Joining us right now is Minnesota Senate Minority Leader Mark Johnson. Thank you so much for coming on.
Hey, thanks so much, Esme, for having me on.
Okay. All right, and I should say that you are from East Grand Forks in northwestern Minnesota. Your thoughts about this North Star Act bill that would make Minnesota a sanctuary state?
Yeah, Esme, that really is an interesting piece of legislation that Senator Fate and the Democrats are proposing. Right now in Minnesota, we've already got, we're at our maximum when it comes to things like our education system, our school districts, our healthcare systems are really struggling right now. And what this bill does is it says that we're not going to be working with our federal partners to really protect the integrity of Minnesota citizenship. And so we're going to see a lot more burden on those institutions that we rely on in the state and expect good service from. Take, for example, even DVS, where we're going in and getting your driver's license and whatnot. There's already a backlog in that. And now we're going to be saying, hey, everybody come in here. And by the way, after last year, now illegal immigrants are eligible for those driver's license and ID cards as well. So the line's just going to extend even longer, more wait times, when Minnesotans just want our systems to be working.
Okay, and you anticipated actually one of my questions, the changes that were made last year. One of them, the one you're speaking about, is that people who are undocumented can legally get a driver's license in Minnesota. But you're saying that's already creating problems.
But that's already, I mean, even the system as it stands, Minnesota is really having some delays and backlogs within that system right now. So, even if the sanctuary law itself, the North Star Act, doesn't get passed and signed by the governor, even if that doesn't happen, we're signaling out to the rest of the country and the world, quite frankly, that, hey, Minnesota is a place to be coming. If you can get across the border, whether it's north or south, Minnesota is the place to be. And so we're really putting out the signal to all these illegal immigrants that come to Minnesota and put a burden on the system here.
So just with our existing sanctuary counties and sanctuary cities, you're saying it's already a problem. Let me ask you about East Grand Forks, because we don't.
Sure.
People ignore that northern border a lot, but does the fact that there are sanctuary communities in Minnesota affect people who are living in the northern border, and is it something that you're concerned about?
Sure, and so that's a concern that we don't think about much when we think about border integrity and people crossing. If you think back just last year, we had a family from India,
Yeah.
a wife and a husband and their young children that were coming across. And if you remember last winter, we actually had a real Minnesota winter. And they ended up freezing to death trying to cross that border. I mean, there are people coming across the northern and the southern borders, not to the same extent and probably a different situation, but it is something that's a concern for us as well as we share that border with a northern country.
And how about your constituents? What are you hearing from them on this issue? Are they concerned about Minnesota becoming a sanctuary state or the expansion of what is already existing in Minnesota in terms of giving those who are undocumented access to certain services, but also
Sure.
really protections from law enforcement?
Yeah, and the constituents are concerned, I think, about from like a resource perspective, on what the impact is going to be for them getting, just bread and butter basic services that we expect from our government. The public education, our transportation system, our healthcare delivery, system. Those sorts of things that we kind of expect that to function in this state. One of the other things too that personally I'm concerned about is we're in a USA, so if the federal government working hand in glove with the state governments, and there really has been in the last year or so an effort to bifurcate the federal government's jurisdiction over the state, and so things like think of the recreational marijuana bill that passed. There still the feds are saying it's a tier 1 drug, and Minnesota says, well, just ignore that. Now with the sanctuary bill, we're saying, oh, ignore the federal government and the rules and their preemption, and we'll just concentrate on other things here in Minnesota. And so we're no longer working with our federal government partners as the Constitution is kind of laid out, and we've always operated. So it's a real disregard for our American system and democracy, the way it should be working.
All right. And you're saying your constituents don't like that?
Oh, absolutely not. Absolutely not.
All right. Minority Leader Johnson, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time.
Hey, thank you, Esme. Appreciate it.
Up next, the president of the board of the Interfaith Coalition on Immigration on the faith-based argument for a sanctuary state. Well, joining us right now is Greg King. He is the president of the board of the Interfaith Coalition on Immigration. Thank you so much, Greg, for coming on.
Yeah, happy to be here, Esme.
What is your thought? I mean, you are in favor of the North Star Act. What would it do to help the immigrants that your interfaith community helps?
Absolutely. We are one of 10 organizations that is devoting significant resources to promoting and pushing for this North Star Act. And it would primarily draw, sharp distinctions between local law enforcement and federal immigration enforcement. And there are 2 instances. So we are people of faith who gather together to support community members who are going through crises caused by what we see as dehumanizing and criminalizing immigration systems. And we support families who are in our community, have been in our community for decades and are put into crises unnecessarily. And there's 2 primary issues that we see where we think this kind of clear separation will really help. One is people who encounter law enforcement for relatively minor issues, possibly even moving violations and driving traffic violations, and then get questioned about and detained on their immigration status when there's no clear public safety issue that's being addressed. And those people can get put into detention and end up being deported, serving a life sentence for what for most of us would be a fine or a ticket. And these are people who are, this act is primarily written to address the lives of people who are in our state today, who are our neighbors. Many of these people have been, they may not be citizens, but they've been here for decades. They are paying taxes. They often have family members who are citizens or mixed status, and other people who depend on them in the community.
Let me ask you this, because you already have some of these protections in some cities. Is that not enough? Does it need to be statewide, in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, I think the impulse is the same. And so it works well in the cities that we see that have the most immigrants and have the most public safety interest in creating that sense of trust between law enforcement and immigrant communities. And so we think it would help statewide. We tend to think of the Twin Cities as being the most diverse communities, but there are many communities right now where immigrant populations are moving in and bringing economic and cultural vitality, whether it's Worthington, Austin, St. Cloud, Rochester, and all of those people have the same need for public safety and trust with law enforcement. And so we think that kind of statewide law would just give us that blanket protection.
Immigration the debate is so heated and so polarizing right now. What are your thoughts about what the actual debate is doing towards the actual immigrant that you deal with, who you are trying to help, many of whom, as you said, have been here for years, if not decades?
Yeah, it breaks my heart, to be honest, because I think most of us want the same things. We want a safe state that has economic vitality. And many people looking soberly at it know that immigrants coming into our state are necessary. Our natural birth rate is not keeping up with our economy and the need to fill jobs. And so the sad part is, I think what's happening nationally and the polarization of it is preventing us from getting to, real substantive fixes. And I think there are many. I think a compassionate immigration system that prioritizes bringing people in safely, safe for our communities and safe for those people is possible. But I do think at this point, the federal government seems unable to address the issue comprehensively. And I think at a state level, we have an interest in standing with our values and doing what we can to let the immigrants that we depend on today know that they should feel safety, trust, and respect like the rest of us.
And do you have any thoughts about the odds on this passing?
Well, I think it's going to be a long uphill road because of the political climate, basically. My hope was, when we introduced it with a lot of fanfare and a lot of excitement from groups, immigrant communities, which hopefully our legislators saw, was that we could talk about the substance of the bill and get past the rhetoric and the social media, and even what is meant by the word sanctuary, which has no legal definition.
Right.
It's more of a Rorschach test of values, both positive and negative. And so my hope is we can still have those conversations and help legislators understand how this will make our state better and our immigrant neighbors that we depend on and need feel safer. And so, I won't say that I feel like we have a really high probability of success off the bat, but I really hope we can have substantive conversations and talk about what's in the bill and how we think it actually holds up Minnesota values.
All right. Greg King, thank you so much. We really appreciate your time.
Well, thanks for the time, Esme, and thanks for helping me talk about what we think is an important bill.
And that does it for this edition of Talking Points. As always, please feel free to email me with comments or suggestions at esme@wcco.com. Talking Points streams every Wednesday and Thursday night on CBS News Minnesota at 6:30 and 9:30 p.m. Friday, the show posts to YouTube for on-demand viewing. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Esme Murphy, WCCO News.